In the last session, we began looking at the one and only block to our awareness of love's presence, the ego. And we talked about what is the ego. It's the self that we think we are. It's the mistaken identity. Some refer to it as the pain body. It's that part of us that desires something. And it is this wonderful mantra, which is seek and do not find. So we want to continue on further with looking at what is this ego and how does it hurt us? Because it's important for us to be able to be aware of it. Once it's come up to our awareness, only then can we relinquish it. We mentioned earlier already that whenever we feel guilty, angry, jealous, victimized, we're an ego. And the ego's voice barks at us loudly at that point. It tells us we are justified in now reacting, either through attack or defense. Both are exactly the same. The end game in trying to tell us that it's justified in attacking is so that when we actually attack the other, it leaves us with a feeling of emptiness. It leaves us with a feeling of isolation and aloneness. Usually after we've won an argument, briefly or even for a while after that, we might feel superior, it might feel good to be right, it might feel fantastic to have won. But at some point that will subside, and that sense of aloneness and isolation returns. And this is the ego's game plan. It sets up conflict because it believes that attack and defense are justified. Because the only way it can keep its existence intact, it thinks, is by winning. It has to make itself real. And all the while, every time it wins another hollow victory, what happens to us is that we feel more and more alone and isolated. It takes more and more effort to prop up the structures that we now found ourselves constantly defending. If you like, what happens is that in an argument, we may win the battle, but we lose the war. Because again, we lose another relationship. The ego is always looking to limit us. And how it does this is by projecting the past onto the present and extending that out into the future. So, how does it do this? For example, if we were offered the opportunity to participate in something, like a play, right away the ego is there, whispering in our ear, or sometimes shouting loudly in our ear, "Remember the last time you did anything public? You were 4 years old, you got out in front of the family, you forgot your words, everybody started laughing, you started crying, they laughed some more, and that was the end of it." And the ego was there, you see, replacing God, putting its gentle arms around your shoulder and telling you, there. They may all be laughing, but I'm with you. I'll protect you. We'll never sing again. It's okay. And then what happens is that gets filed so that any future public engagements, it brings that memory file back up and says, I know this isn't quite singing, this is only public speaking, or this is addressing your staff, but remember what happened when you were 4. And we can't have that happen again. We don't want that, do we? We don't want humiliation. And so we shrink back into our ever-limiting ego existence and decline the offering. It also limits us by comparison, always looking at how we're doing in comparison to others, or how we should be doing in comparison to our age or our gender or our weight, and so on. Any kind of comparing is the ego. Again, trying to limit us. It might sound fantastic, unbelievable, but its goal is your death. I say that because its goal is to convince you that you are a body, that you are mortal, and therefore perishable. It has a finite beginning and an end. And so long as it can keep you mired in suffering or mired in desire, you will believe that you are a body and that this life is real. And so long as you believe that this life is real and that you are a body, suffering is guaranteed. That's why the name of the game is waking up. And how we wake up is by developing trust. And we'll move on to talk more and more about that later.
So what is unconscious guilt? And what is it in practical terms? Unconscious guilt, as we said previously, is that mass of guilt that we acquired at the seeming separation, although we must remember that it never really happened. It's sort of a paradox. It's like we're here now, but this is a dream, and the dream never really occurred in time. So it's a difficult one to wrap our minds around, but we don't really need to wrap our minds around it. All we need to do is follow the process, and this is the process that we're outlining now. So the unconscious guilt that we're talking about is that immense fear that we felt and the guilt that we acquired at that time when we decided the one mind, remember it's just the one mind, so it's nobody outside of you, it's in your mind, it's in my mind. What this is that great fear and guilt that we felt when we made the decision to experience something other than perfect love. We made a decision to experience otherness, therefore we made a decision to experience suffering. So, to summarise what unconscious guilt is in practical terms is the suffering factor in our lives. And the way that we can see it is whenever we experience anxiety or pain, physical pain, depression, conflict within or conflict with others, seeming accidents, they all come from this unconscious guilt. And it's not until we begin to undo the unconscious guilt that we start to have some real peace in our lives and some real consistency with love as well.
So unconscious guilt is really a way by which we seek to hurt ourselves because we believe that we are guilty, because we believe in the myth of the separation. We believe that we did actually separate and run away, and so we are unworthy and therefore need to manifest suffering in our lives as a way of penance, which is all false and which is part of what we also need to undo.
This unconscious guilt, being the suffering factor, is really our unconscious self-attack that's being expressed outside of us. So what we do in the ego mind is that when we see attack outside, in other words, when we take offense, what we do is we react to that as if it's real, not realizing that what we're doing is we're reacting to our own unconscious self-attack. So the ego goes out and then defends, or it tries to control the situation, not realizing that all the time it's just collecting even more unconscious guilt, because the truth is there's only one of us. So the objective with undoing unconscious guilt is to realize whenever our buttons are pressed that all we need to do is to forgive it. We need to look at it, be aware of it with the divine, with spirit, and then to overlook it, which is the quantum forgiveness, which we'll talk a little bit more about later on. So in practical terms, every time our buttons are pressed is the sign that our unconscious guilt has raised its head. not to hurt us. It's never to hurt us. It's only to show us that our own unconscious self-attack is being projected outside of us for us to see. The only goal here is for us to heal that. In other words, to take back that outward projection, to take it back without judgment and to let it go. And that's how we find that we're healing during our life. That's how we get more and more opportunities to love and to be loved. That's how we receive love. So let's have a look at giving offense and taking offense. From the ego's perspective, one of them is worse than the other. Obviously, giving offense is worse than taking offense. And yet, in the terms that we're speaking of here, they're both the same. They're both the same mistake. Because if I take offense, and there's only one of us here, then I'm not seeing the truth. By taking offense, I am saying that I am a victim of you who is a separated self. But I'm not a victim. This is what I need to learn here. So giving offense or taking offense is the same. So every time our buttons are pressed, we could look at the situation differently. Instead of taking offense, we could be in the now moment, practice being the observer, and see it as an opportunity of gratitude, because it's an opportunity for re-evaluation, reinterpretation, and an opportunity for forgiveness. And every time we forgive, what happens is we're undoing a great chunk of the ego. In other words, what we're doing is we're undoing a huge chunk of our unconscious guilt, which is the suffering factor in our lives. So as we undo the ego, we have an increasing experience of joy and love and peace. Also, we have this amazing appreciation of the abundance that's increasing in our lives as well, because we don't need to flog ourselves anymore by projecting our unconscious self-attack outside and having that come back to us. So there's great advantage every time we have our buttons pressed. So if we can just let gratitude arise for that, that would help us greatly.
So here's a really mundane life situation, but it clearly illustrates the ego at work. I notice that whenever I step into the kitchen to cook, for example, within 5 minutes, Nouk will be there. And she'll be reminding me for the 100th time to do this or that or whatever, even though I've done it 100 times like that. She can't help herself with it. And it sets up the perfect example to illustrate this kind of attack. So let me back up a little bit. Earlier in the day, I might be looking at my finances and worrying and thinking to myself, oh my goodness, how are we going to survive this next period? The ego, being what it is, then says, oh, that's a feeling of discomfort, and there's a welling anger and feeling like a victim inside. How can I get this outside of me? How can I project this onto another? And so I have a seemingly separate thought, which is, oh, I might do something good tonight, which is cook. So I'll march into the kitchen and begin preparing dinner, subconsciously knowing full well that within 5 minutes Nouk will appear, suddenly. And as she appears, the usual instructions will be given to me. Don't forget to do this, don't forget to do that. Are you going to do this the way I like it? And so on. All of which then give me the perfect reason to retort in such a way that I can project my self-attack onto her. So I'll then react by saying, geez, you know, every time I step into the kitchen, you appear. Every time that I cook this particular dish, you ask whether I'm going to put the garlic in, knowing full well I am always going to do that. So you see how this sets this up. From an observer's point of view, one might say, Yes, clearly. Nouk, why are you on his case? That's how it would seem. Truth of the matter is that I actually initiated the attack. I know what presses the buttons. Right? And this is why relationships are such a hotbed for healing. Because in relationship, any kind of relationship, it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship, but any relationship where two people know each other fairly well, we know where each other's buttons are. And the example that I just gave, it clearly demonstrates how the ego sets it up. I, in that case, set Nouk up to look like she was the perpetrator and I was the victim, when in fact, I was the perpetrator. So you might take a moment there and ask yourself, how do you set up your loved ones? How do you set up situations in your environment, be they at home or at work, so that you can come off looking like the innocent party? This then will give you a clear idea of how projection works in your life. In this session, Nouk talked about our unconscious guilt and how we attack ourselves with it. So we have an exercise called the guilt meter, which we'd like to share with you. And here is a very simple way for you to see for yourself where your ego hides, where it meters out attack on yourself and how it does it. Because unconscious guilt, it's unconscious, right? How do we find it? Well, after years of looking at ourselves and our own patterns, we came up with just a few questions here that might be helpful for you to find where your own unconscious guilt hides. So what is unconscious guilt again? These are those buttons that when pressed cause us to react negatively. And the other criteria about this is that it seems to be happening outside of us. So I'd like you to now answer the following questions in your own mind by answering them as either frequently, sometimes, or rarely. Okay, so we're ready to go ahead. Here are our questions. Do you find you judge others? Frequently, sometimes, or rarely? Do you judge yourself? Frequently, sometimes, or rarely? The self-judgment one, that's a good one, isn't it? Because you can do that in the privacy of your own home. Nobody has to see you. The outside world sees this smiling person every day, but quietly, in the privacy of your own home, you can just go to town and flog yourself with self-judgment. So answer that one for yourself. Frequently, sometimes, or rarely? How often do you react negatively to what others do or don't do? Frequently, sometimes, or rarely? How often do you respond with defense, anger, attack, frustration when things don't go your way? Do you sense injustice personally or within the world? Do you feel your needs are not being met financially? Frequently, sometimes, or rarely? Do you feel your needs are not being met in terms of love? In other words, with your partner? Do you feel your needs are not being met by your family? These could include your children, your siblings, your parents. Frequently, sometimes, or rarely? Do you feel any struggle or sacrifice? Do you experience anxiety, fear, or doubt frequently, sometimes, rarely? Do you experience physical discomfort or illness? Do you experience anxiety over worldly matters, for example, the global warming, war, terrorism, the economic situation at the moment? Frequently, sometimes, rarely. And do you have difficulty sleeping? Frequently, sometimes, rarely. See, that simple set of questions clearly demonstrates and shows you where you're at in terms of the level of unconscious guilt that you're carrying with you. If you've answered frequently and sometimes to the bulk of those questions, then it's no wonder that you might be feeling alone, isolated, suffering from depression, anxiety, not being able to sleep well. Because all of those different questions are all different ways in which we are attacking ourselves unconsciously. They're all the ways in which we have attached ourselves to this world. See, Jesus came and he spoke about, okay, be in this world because we have free will. Be in this world, but don't be of it, he told us. He told us that this world is like a bazaar, a market, with all these traders, with all these bright shiny trinkets, calling us forward to buy, to get involved. And in A Course in Miracles, he tells us not to linger in time. As he says, God's Son does not travel in outer worlds. This is not our home. And when we attach ourselves to this as our home, we will suffer. When we forget that we are one, we will judge others and then feel separated. When we think that this body is real and is the temple, as opposed to the temple being within, with God, when we believe that the body is the temple, then when we project discomfort or illness onto the body, we suffer. When we believe that this world is our home and we've seen the stock market crash and 50% of our wealth wiped out, we will suffer. But when we learn to detach, and this is what Jesus told us, right, to detach. Two great teachings I thought that he gave us. Don't be of this world, which means to detach from this world. And later on in the program, we'll show you how to do that. And the other one was that he spoke to us about being as children. And children accept. Children don't need to intellectualize or analyze. They simply accept. Earlier, Nouk did an exercise with you around our favorite illusions of identity. And in that list we had that we were attached to maybe being a partner, or we're attached to our nation, race, or tribe, or we're attached materially to our possessions, or we're attached to our addictions. We might also be attached to our role as a parent or a caregiver or a child or a husband. I just want to share an example of what we mean by how these mistaken identities can hurt us. So I'm a father. Nouk and I share a daughter, Ricky, who's now 21. But when she was 14, she made a decision to undo a chunk of her ego. And I'll talk about the lessons in that later. But one of the lessons, and there were many, but one of the lessons that we got out of that period, and by the way, when I say that period, at the age of 14, what happened is that Ricky developed anorexia and bulimia and actually became suicidal, which for a parent is the worst nightmare, the prospect of your child dying. So in this phase of her illness, what happened is that I recognized that I, as a father, as one of my mistaken identities, had projected what it meant to be a father onto my child Ricky, and had projected what it meant to be a child and a daughter and a girl onto Ricky. I projected both sets of beliefs. It wasn't until she fell ill that I recognized that I didn't know her at all. So let me explain that. You see, I never took the time to find out who she was. I thought my role as a father was to work hard, very hard, to earn enough money so that she could go to the best school she possibly could. In this case, a private school. I did that. It didn't matter that I came home at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night grumpy, and therefore could not connect with her and love her. What was more important was that I paid for this education. Now there's another sacred cow, education, and we'll talk about that in a second. The other belief I had as a father was that you will eat 3 meals a day if it kills you. Or if I kill you. Again, how absurd is that? I could not see that policy of trying to force her to eat was a projection of my fears around her health. And instead of raising that up to the light and speaking openly with her about this, instead I projected it onto her, me being the father who knows more, onto her being the daughter who knows less. Another myth, which we can explore. The other thing that I did was that I believed that to be well-rounded, any child should be involved in all sorts of activities. So I dragged her around all the social activities. I became her soccer coach and her swimming coach. Ricky's an introvert. For her, the idea of a great time is to be, is to sit and be, is to be one-on-one with somebody. And from that space of sharing that being, an activity may or may not arise. The activity is inconsequential to the connection. For me, I had projected that the form, the activity, was far more important than the connection. So I dragged her around. So it wasn't until she fell ill that I recognized that this poor child had been nodding and agreeing with me and so on, and all the while knew deep in her heart that we were not connected, that I actually hadn't seen her. And when I recognized that I hadn't seen my baby at all, it just broke my heart. And I recognized only then, wow, in spite of all the years of study that I had been doing to undo my ego, here was another area of projection. Here was another area of mistaken identity. I mentioned before that I instructed her as if I knew better. It wasn't until she fell ill that I recognized another myth, another parental projection, that I, just because I'm older in earth years and larger in size, could actually be wiser than her. That was a fallacy and a myth. Spiritually, we are the same. Both equals, both teachers, both students. But I completely overlooked that. In fact, I didn't even recognize that. Now that I have my chance again to do the parenting thing over, all I'd be saying to a child is, stove hot, water deep. And the rest of the time, I would be saying to that child, how can I be of service? Because I've been around this illusion called life a little longer than you. So maybe I have some skills about how to negotiate this game called life. But first and foremost, I want to connect with you. Who are you? What do you want? How can I be of service to you? I would turn parenting into servicing. And this doesn't mean doing things for children, but it does mean facilitating it. Facilitating the learning, but the learning that they want. Which leads me back to that myth that I mentioned in the first place around education. This was huge for me. Huge in the sense that I could see when I realized that Ricky was ill and decided she didn't want to do school anymore. Oh, by the way, she decided she didn't want to do school anymore at the age of 14 years. You can't even make that decision, I think, legally. But there she was, she made that decision at 14. No more school. Well, this raised all sorts of fears in me. And it was only then that I recognized that again, I had projected onto Ricky that she must do her schoolwork, that she must do her maths, even though she was crying onto the page. I would still bark at her and yell at her to complete her homework because of my fears, my projection of my fears about her future life. None of this was my business. My business is to love and to extend forgiveness. That's the only part of my business. So I'm really grateful to our daughter Ricky for being such a wonderful teacher. And in that illness, she taught us a whole bunch of lessons. But for the purpose of this exercise about the illusion of identity, I wanted to show you that here was one big post that I had called fatherhood. My beliefs around parenthood and fatherhood were all based on fear. They were all based on control. They were all based on ideas outside that I'd taken on from my parents, from society, from whatever I'd learned in this world, and then superimposed, projected onto my child. I did not actually come to parenting from asking deep within, how do I connect and love my child? I never asked that question. The other thing that it made me realize in terms of this mistaken identity, and I think we've said before how it limits us, if I can give you a visual that might help you. Before we had this tiny mad idea, everything that was absolutely and totally available to us, the entire panorama was our home. Awareness is all. Awareness is everywhere. Awareness is everything. But then in this tiny mad idea, we made time and space. We made the world. And then we made the body within the world. So imagine now, here is this body. And even within the world, our potential is unlimited. But as we grow, we're actually taught to take on opinions, to take on information as fact, as truth, to take on, for example, political beliefs. Are you a Republican? Are you a Democrat? Are you pro this? Are you anti that? To further our education, go to college, get a degree. If we're a man or a woman, we're told and educated about what is the role of a man, a woman, all of these beliefs that we take on board and learn, imagine this. What we actually do is, it's like going to the lumberyard of a Saturday and buying all these posts, fence posts, coming home and then hammering in each of these beliefs in a circular fashion right around us. I am a man, and we hammer one post in, and this is what it means. I am a parent, and we hammer in another post, and this is what it means. I'm a Democrat, and this is what it means. I'm pro this, I'm anti that. I am a CEO, and so on, until we've complete the circle. And then the funniest thing is, we proudly put our fists on our hips, and with a big smile, we proclaim, and I am free. This is what we all do. In Course in Miracles, this is referred to as the little garden. Our potential is everywhere and everything. In fact, it's our inheritance. But we take on board all these beliefs and values and opinions and identities, and we hammer them in, and then we proclaim, I am free. In fact, in this society, we're told that this is a good thing. But we're actually limited. In what ways are we limited? So to give you an idea, if I have a set of posts around me, of course, you'll have your set of posts around you. If I have one post that says I'm a Democrat, and your post says you're a Republican, well, we have to fight, don't we? I have to defend my post, and you have to defend yours. Importantly, we can't join. If we can't join, what's actually happening is that we're reiterating the false belief that we are separate, that you are different from me. Because we've identified with, for example, our political persuasion. We haven't identified that we are one in terms of truth. We've identified at the level of form in this world, in this illusion called life, that you are different from me because of our political persuasion. Now imagine all the different posts that we each have set up. These are all the limiting factors. It's impossible for me now to join with you if I hold a different belief system than you. And so now we can see here what Jesus meant by, be in this world, but don't be of it. By being of it, we are purchasing all these posts and sticking them around us and imprisoning ourselves, making it impossible for us to, even in this dream, have our potential, meet our potential, realize that we are unlimited and able to do anything we can, and B, we're unable to join with another. Never the twain shall meet. And we'll talk about romance and relationships later, but the funny thing is, you see, in romance and relationships, that's also what we're doing. We're actually comparing posts and saying, oh, I like your fence, do you like mine? Because we both can't see each other. What we're looking is at the fence post. I like rock music, you like rock music. I like romantic comedies, you like romantic comedies. I like to cook, you like to cook. And we're actually basing our relationship on our framework, not on who we are. We're comparing it on our egotistical and egoic framework. No wonder so many relationships become disillusioned and fall apart. Because, as in the example of my daughter Ricky and I, two people never saw each other.
The fence posts that Tomas is talking about, they obstruct our ability to see the other, and yet we say we love each other in many of our close relationships. Well, the truth is that we really can't know love through the ego. While we have this obstruction, which is this fence around us, we can't see another, and nor can we see ourselves. So this is really important. It's important to see that the first thing that we need to do here is look at those mistaken identities. What are those mistaken identities? And just by looking at them, as we said before, with spirit, they can be reinterpreted. It doesn't mean that they need to be threatened, so don't be frightened, as I was in this early part of the journey. I was frightened of loss and sacrifice. I thought, well, gee, this has been my identity so far. I'm so scared to lose it because I'm afraid there'll be nothing left. And nobody will love me, and certainly nobody will see me. The opposite is true. The thing is that during the journey, my journey till now, nothing was lost. Not one valuable thing was lost, nor did I sacrifice in any way. And we know now that during the journey, you can't lose anything. So please don't be fearful about that. You know, our number one desire is to be seen. Our number one desire is to be loved with no conditions, to be seen as pure innocence. In other words, to be loved by another, so that there is nothing that we could do or say that would end the love between us. That's what we all want. We all want that. And the issue or the problem, the challenge that we all have is this mistaken identity fence. And we said before, they obstruct our ability to see. So many of us, as when we were children, we experienced some type of abuse, either emotional abuse, mild or severe, or physical abuse or whatever. In some way, most of us as children felt that we weren't seen. And this is true, we weren't seen, and that's okay. But it's nobody's fault that we weren't seen. It's very important to see that our parents, of course, had egos. They too were unseen. And because they were unseen and they had this mistaken identity fence around them, they couldn't see us. Unless we've been raised by one or both parents being totally enlightened, we would have had a very hard time as children. To give you an example, I perceived that I was an abused child with a mother that was overbearing, extremely controlling, manipulating, and quite emotionally abusive. And I held that grudge against her until I began to undo the ego around 20 years ago or so. Because I really felt that she could have changed her parenting style, and I felt that she was awfully abusive, and what I wanted from her was to be seen. I just wanted to be validated, to be approved, and to be seen as innocent. And yet the message that I seemed to get from my parent, from my mother, was that, look, I wasn't worthwhile, I was undeserving, and that I certainly was not innocent in any way, shape or form. So I struggled with that for most of my life. And I think we all struggle with that, whether it be an abusive parent or an abusive teacher, maybe even an abusive sibling when we were growing up. And it's these people in our lives that we unconsciously carry through to the present. What we do is we take that abuse and then we unconsciously superimpose that on somebody here in the now moment. That is why most of our healing can be done here in the now, because all of the people that are in our lives that are pressing our buttons right now, it doesn't matter who it is. It might be a partner, it might be a child, it might be a parent, it could even be a colleague at work. But these people are really superimposed parents or siblings or whoever seemed to abuse us from the past. They're just being superimposed in the now moment upon these innocent, fairly innocent people who are in the now moment with us. So it's like looking back to those times, we need to really forgive whatever happens in the now. We need to see that whatever is happening in the now is really a problem that came from the past, and we're just superimposing it from the past. The parents that we had, like my mother, that seemed to abuse me as a child, What I see now is that I see that she could not have really abused me if she knew who she was, if her ego had been out of the way. She would never have done what she did. The same goes for anybody who seems to be hurting you now or seemed to hurt you in the past. Nobody without an ego could hurt you or would hurt you. It's impossible. So all of these people who seem to abuse us or hurt us in the past, they were coming from their mistaken identity, from the ego. And it's up to us who's beginning to wake up to see this. So whenever anybody hurts us or seems to hurt us, whenever anybody seems to cause offence or whatever, basically, as A Course in Miracles says, that really is just a cry for love. Remember we said earlier that there are only two expressions for love. There's either an expression of love, which is clearly identifiable, or there's a cry for love, which we usually take as an attack. And what do? We usually defend. So if we really want to heal, we need to also look at our parents in a different light and have a look at what seeming abuse occurred and see that really, from our parents' perspective, that was purely a cry for love. They had fully fledged egos, and so how could they possibly have seen us as a child? Previously, Tomas was talking about how when we relate to others, especially in romantic relationships or with friends, what we tend to do through the ego is we tend to match up fence posts rather than to have the intent to see each other, truly see each other. In other words, to become vulnerable with each other. What we tend to do in relationships is we try to seek agreement. We try to get the other to agree with us, because somewhere there in the ego it says that if somebody agrees with me, they see me. This is not the case in truth, and we don't really recognize that until we've undone some ego, because it doesn't take somebody to agree with us to see us. It really takes for us to be vulnerable and to look at ourselves and to accept the other for whoever they are. That's what helps us to undo the ego. To give you an example of this, a real life example of this, my husband Nick, we call him Saint Nick. He's a wonderful, wonderful man. However, from the outside, somebody looking from outside might see that we have very different interests, Nick and I, vastly different interests. To give you an example of this, Nick has extremely strong political ideas and ideals. I have none. I always joke and say that when the Dalai Lama is represented here in this country as a candidate for presidency, I might vote then. Otherwise, I'm not really interested. Whereas Nick is a very radical conservative Republican. He has a certain resonance with George W. Bush, the former president. He has very strong ideas on anti-abortion. He has all of these very strong fence posts, or mistaken identities as I would call them. But they're not the same beliefs that I have at all. Yet we never argue about them. Why is that? Because I don't challenge him on any of those. I don't say to him, hey Nick, you're wrong in thinking this or thinking that. What I do is just listen with kindness and just nod my head and let him have his ideas. I don't need for him to agree with mine. The only time that's real for me and the time that we get to connect is when I am truly vulnerable and when I am looking at my own stuff and communicate that to him without telling him he's wrong. And this is something we'll be talking about more when we talk about the relationship section of this program. It is important to realize that we can't be seen, truly seen, if we're trying to seek agreement with another. That is just what A Course in Miracles calls a special relationship. In other words, what we're doing is we're seeking to meet conditions. While we try to seek to meet conditions, we're not doing anything real. We're not seeing each other, and we're certainly not seeing ourselves. See, the game is not to be good here. The game is to be authentic. And the only way to be authentic is to dare to be vulnerable, to dare to be in the present moment, and to dare to know and recognize what's going on within. And it's from that space that we can relate truthfully and honestly with another. It's from that space that we can learn to appreciate others, to have gratitude for others, to come from forgiveness for others, and therefore to undo that great chunk of ego that we have that's actually blinding ourselves from seeing the other. Now that translates to us not being able to receive love. So this is a very, very important part of the undoing of ego. So the objective here in undoing the ego is to actually undo those buttons that keep getting pressed. That's the objective. And we can't do it all at once, but we can do it gradually. And I might give you a couple of examples here that might help you understand how this was a gradual process. Many years ago, when Tomas and I were married and we were going through a very difficult period in our relationship, we had what the Course calls a special relationship, a conditional relationship, that later had to be undone and reinterpreted into a holy or unified relationship or an unconditional relationship. But in those early days, I had a lot of mistaken identities, which were threatened quite a bit by Tomas. That was my perception. And so many of our arguments in our marriage, in our relationship back in those days, were because I had these fixed ideas and fixed values and beliefs and conditions that I refused to let go of. And he, as my partner, seemed to threaten those. So if he didn't agree with me, then I took that personally. And then we would have an argument, and so on and so on. And what has occurred since then, over time, as I've undone more of the ego, is that with Nick now, I have this relationship with Nick, which, by the way, this relationship was chosen by me not because we matched our mistaken identities. In other words, not because we matched our personalities. This particular relationship was initiated more consciously. I knew that Nick would be my greatest teacher. I knew that he had the medicine that would help to undo whatever blocks were left, hopefully in this lifetime, so that I could awaken fully. And because I knew that, I had great gratitude for him, and I was less likely to react by him seemingly giving me offence or whatever, or not agreeing with me and all of that sort of thing. So the goal in our relationship is to wake up. That's the goal. Nick, of course, didn't share the same goal in the beginning, and that's okay, because truly it only takes one of us in relationship to really transform the relationship. So it only takes one of us to transform the relationship. I might put a condition here too, is that sometimes if we're in a very abusive relationship, we may need to leave. I am not condoning any physical or severe emotional abuse here. What we're talking about is a relationship where there is a definite feeling that it's going to work. It's just that we know there's a lot to work on. And if that's the type of relationship that we have, then it's all systems go. And it only really takes us, because remember, there's only one of us in this dream. One of us appearing as many. There's only one ego appearing as many, and there's only one unified self. So, going back to the story of Nick here, I married Nick because I knew he'd be my greatest teacher, and I knew that he would press whatever buttons I had left. How's that for turning the relationship goal upside down? So, to give you an example, last year, probably 12 months, maybe even 18 months ago, just around about the time our book had been newly released, we had an extended family gathering, a big 3-course meal. Everybody was excited about the book. And our family, or one member of our family, asked Nick, the book is out, take me to truth, have you read it? Well, Nick's response was, of course not. Why would I read a book like that? I don't have an ego to undo. Now, if that scenario had occurred 10 or 15 years ago to me, I would have been deeply hurt by that response. But my response this time round, just recently, was one of laughter. I just laughed and I laughed and I laughed and everybody else laughed and Nick laughed as well. And it was a very sacred and healing moment because that was one personal, private, mistaken identity that was not there anymore. Nobody could hurt that. Nobody could threaten that. And Nick, of course, didn't mean to hurt me or threaten me in any way, shape or form. He was just saying the truth, which is that he has no ego to undo. That was his belief. And I allowed that to be. There was nothing left to do except laugh, and laugh in joy. And so that's just one example there of how your whole relationship can transform as you disidentify with your own sacred cows. Then what happens is that you can receive love. Also, you can give more love. You can be a lot closer to your partner as well. By the way, you don't need to find somebody who's your complete opposite in a relationship in order to undo your ego. That's just something that I did. You have the perfect people right there now in your life, whether it be your partner, parents, your children, siblings, colleagues. They are the people who are your greatest teachers. Anybody who presses your buttons right now is a teacher and really is calling for your gratitude.
We've reached the halfway point of the program. I know it's been pretty rough going this first half, but it needed to be. Because in order for us to be free, we need to first look at the obstacles to love's presence. So we've covered a fair bit of ground. We've looked at what is the ego. We've looked at our mistaken identities. We've looked at how the ego can hurt us. We've discussed the misperception of separation and how the ego then made the world to run and hide from the big fella. How in that misrepresented guilt that we feel, we drove it into the unconscious and so therefore projected it out onto everyone else. All of this helps to set the platform for us to continue. We can see at this point now, we are not a victim of the world we see. We can see now our way out because we can reverse cause and effect. We can take responsibility. We are the cause. And at the same time, this is not a morbid or huge responsibility. It would be if it was real, but it's not. Because remember, this is just an illusion, a dream, a tiny mad idea, an instant the Son of God remembered not to laugh. It is just a black comedy, and we're all just taking it so seriously. We mentioned too about Jesus' teaching. Be in the world, sure, but don't be of it. Very clearly telling us to detach from this world. Now again, this doesn't mean we have to walk around with a lap and a begging bowl. We can have all of the possessions that we want. We can do all of the things that we wish to do and accomplish and have dreams of in this world. But the trick is to not be attached to it, to have no sense of identity and owning and belonging to anything here in this dimension, in this dream. So now we're ready to move on. Where are we moving on to? What we want to do is let go of our trust in the ego, which we've had up to this point in time, and transfer that to trust in the universal inspiration.